Welcome to The Founder's Mind. This is your host, Adam Muchler. On today's episode, I have Aubrey Blanche, who is the Global Head of Diversity and Belonging at Atlassian. Whether she's advising startups, working her full-time job, or sharing her perspective and learnings across the digital world, Aubrey has emerged as an influential voice on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Listen in as she shares the perspective she's developed along the way. Hi, Aubrey. Welcome to The Founder's Mind.
Good. Yes, I've got to turn off my Stride, Wire, HipChat.
Yeah, I don't even
that application.
I don't even know what half those things are, which is only a little concerning.
Well, so Stride is Atlassian's newest product, so it's a communications platform. Launched it in September, and so we're moving it to generally available soon.
Ooh.
But yeah, I will say, and I realize that I'm sort of like aggressively on brand right now, but I actually love it. Like genuinely. Yeah, just some of the features they built in are just very good for me. I think being sort of a globally distributed workforce gave them some really interesting insight into the kinds of challenges you deal with 24-hour notifications and things like that. But also, so this sounds really weird. I've been playing with this for the last couple of weeks, but we have the ability sort of in Stride to, in like a group chat, you can take something that's been said and turn it into a decision or an action. So when your teammates who sort of missed the whole thread of conversation come back in, actually the decisions and actions get highlighted to them first. So they don't have to go read this crazy transcript in order to figure out what happened while they were out of the office or something. So it ends up feeling like you're connected, but taking a lot less time, which, because half my team is here and a big portion of them are in Sydney, we spend a lot of time sort of ping-ponging back and forth.
Heaven forbid you make technology functional.
Right. No, so I get really excited because it's just meaningfully like improved my ability to do stuff.
So many times my experience with technology leaves me with the question of why is it, what is the function of this? And I get what the intention was, but like it doesn't add value. It doesn't make my life easier.
Yeah.
And I worked at Apple for 7 years, and one of the things in retail mostly, but like one of the big things that I was inundated with and pulled away is you want to create technology, whether it's software or hardware, that makes you forget that you're using technology.
Yeah, that
Like
makes sense.
that it's just delivering the value and the function that you need, and that the moment, and that this is why I say that, the moment that little spinning wheel comes up, you remember that it's a computer and you want to throw it out the window.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I think we agree, but I tend to come at it from a different perspective. And again, I'm not actually an engineer, but
Neither am I, by the way.
But my team jokes and they're like, you're the most engineer on our team, because I have this, like, the way that I see everything is in terms of a problem that I'm solving, right? I'm actually Pollyanna, like I'm a crazy optimist, but I really think about what is the problem being solved.
Yeah.
Right. And that's it. And you get to that point of like, is it creating value? Is it reducing friction? Is it serving a purpose? Because what I found is that, especially with technology, when that's not happening, it's because people were solving the wrong problem.
Oh yeah.
Right. They didn't go deep enough. They solved sort of the surface level.
Yeah.
But they didn't actually sort of root cause it to identify what's actually causing the problem and then solve for that one. So you sort of accidentally solve the problems at every layer sort of up along the way.
And I'll take what's coming up for me, which is just where I take things, is that because the development, the engineering space and the startup space is dominated by a single demographic, specifically my demographic.
Yeah.
And men tend to jump to problem solving before, really understanding the problem. If I were to generalize, it's rampant in technology also, and it shows up everywhere, which is problems have been solved that might at the very surface be reasonable, but like when you dig in, like you're saying, you're missing all these parts. Like the did you see that vending machine, like the bodega vending machine debacle on
Little bit.
online?
I was actually out of the country when that was sort of in the news cycle, so I sort of caught the tail end of it and like the analysis, but missed sort of the inciting incident, if you
It
will.
was like a 12-hour Twitter like blow up of this company that launched, called Bodega. They're going to be these vending machines, and they're going to replace bodegas. And my immediate reaction was like, wow, like what a perfect example of Silicon Valley bubble bro mentality. I was like, people have cash. People need to have access to a store. Like you need to have a more diverse inventory than a vending machine. It was very interesting.
That's what, see, I think, yeah, it comes from, so the way that I talk about this and bringing it back to sort of diversity in Silicon Valley, which is sort of my bread and butter, literally, I guess, because that's what I do all day,
Which I love.
is, is that people, no matter who you are, people solve problems they understand.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two reasons I think that the homogeneity of Silicon Valley becomes problematic. One, because you're not necessarily even just talking about sort of bracketing it to a particular sort of gender or racial group, but also in most cases a very particular economic status. So there's an even bigger conditional on that. And so the problems that are being solved, right? And I'm sort of joking, right? I have like 3 apps on my phone to like get pizza delivered to my house. And like that's great for me. Like I really wanted a pizza on
Oh
Saturday.
yeah, yeah.
But but it's unlikely that someone who's come from a very affluent background who maybe isn't a racial minority or isn't sort of marginalized in terms of their gender are going to solve a problem that like a gender queer immigrant and person of color has. And that's not a criticism of that group. It's just that they, one, may lack awareness that the problem exists, but then also lack the context and the understanding of that problem to build a really great solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing for me is and then there's sort of the second piece, which is that when you get a bunch of those people together, sort of whatever demographic, it doesn't matter. When you have a group of people in a room trying to solve a problem and they're all very demographically similar, they're not going to come up with as many solutions
Yeah.
as people who have a broader set of life experiences. And so the statistical probability that you land on the best one, if you're dealing with a constrained versus a very open solution set, like is just very different. And so for me, there's lots of these arguments about why diversity is valuable, but Silicon Valley is sort of predicated on solving these impossible problems. And I'm not convinced that Silicon Valley as a whole actually understands all of the impossible problems out there. So I don't necessarily believe the hype about that type of thing.
No, I mean, I agree with you, and I love it.
I mean, and I have the advantage that I sort of live between a lot of these different groups. So in that way, I'm privileged in a sense from my own perspective and my own life experience that I've sort of lived with one foot in a lot of camps. So I'm, a mixed race Latina woman, but I'm very white passing. I was very lucky to have access to great education. I'm an LGBT person, but I, pass as straight, things like that. So I've been lucky enough to basically get to see both sides of a lot of
Yeah.
issues that most people just don't have the life experience to sort of hop back and forth on.
Yeah.
Like,
Or the lenses. I mean, it's, for me, obviously, white male, and then, the part that's not obvious, but becomes obvious if you get to know me is I'm straight. Something I think about a lot is how do we have more conversations, and how can we expand our lens and not like just develop empathy, but really develop an understanding of what the lens is that I carry by default, and checking that lens as much as I can, because sometimes it happens in a way that's embarrassing. Sometimes it happens in a way that's like, I just didn't know. And sometimes it's, that unconscious bias, which is it rears its head, even though it's not in resonance with my intellectual feelings or knowledge.
mhm. Well, and I think that's it is so something I learned sort of an aggressive lesson when I joined Atlassian, right? Because again, I have the privilege, but also sort of the handicap of I've had a lot of experiences where I've lived on both sides of it. And I got to Atlassian, which is an Australian company. And, all of a sudden I realized how very much my lens as an American influenced the way I thought and perceived things and how I thought about solving problems. And so it's been really amazing for me. And I've talked about this before. As I came in, I was really excited to talk about sort of how do we improve, the representation and experience of racial minorities in technology and all these things. And all of a sudden I got sort of hit in the face by the fact that I had to start a lot earlier because the overwhelming majority of my colleagues weren't American. And so they actually didn't even have a reference set for what the racial ontology of the US looked like, right? Because their racial ontology within their context was very different.
Very.
And so that for me was just such an incredible learning experience to step back and say, okay, I had some assumptions that I brought into this sort of culture in this workplace and this organization. And luckily everyone kind of, I learned really quickly when I had this amazing employee who was like, what does Hispanic mean? And it was such a great, and it sounds so silly to say it was such a great question, but the person was being so vulnerable and honest and sort of admitting they didn't know. But for me, I actually had to step back and go, how would I explain that?
Yeah.
And so it really pushed me to be a better sort of practitioner and leader. But also I think really good forced humility, right? About the assumptions that we carry with us. And so I really try to give people that knowledge, which is how do you identify like you said, how do you identify the assumptions that you carry in? Because being able to identify them is actually really powerful, right? Because you can get rid of them. It's the hard work of being able to go, what is actually true versus what do I think is true because my experience is that equals 1.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And I actually, I lived in Australia for 6 months in high school on an exchange. And so it's saying what is Hispanic mean resonates because I remember being in Australia and saying I was 15, 16. I was like, there are no Mexican restaurants here, but there are a ton of Asian restaurants.
Absolutely. And so it's not that there's sort of a right or a wrong.
Yeah.
Which is the other thing that I think is that D&I, a lot of times it can go into this right or wrong discussion, and a lot of what it's about, right? There are things that are objectively right and wrong, but yeah, I think that's it. Is if you can almost even level up from talking about particular categories of diversity, because people have a lot of complicated emotional realities connected to identity, and just say this is actually about learning and growth and thinking about and being able to with people different from you, and you create an in for them that way. I think it becomes really powerful. So for example, we've tried to do that a couple of ways, which is one, we've really tried to sort of hold on to the concept of intersectionality in all the programming we've done, partially driven by me and my opinions in my life.
Sure.
But also,
you only have a couple intersections.
Right. I know. I'm I'm like hat trick diversity. And
yeah. Like a six-way intersection.
So once I hit 40, right, then I get extra bonus.
Yeah.
But this idea of intersectionality being yo, everyone has layers. Because what I also see happening that I hate is that, straight white men will be like, well, I don't count. And I'm like, well, you totally count. You're a human, so therefore you're valid and you count.
Yeah.
But that diversity has come to mean these marginalized groups, and that's underrepresentation. It's not diversity, right? Diversity requires everyone to be present. Sorry, that gets at my other pet peeve. And people are like, well, I'm not diverse. And I'm like, you're right. It's a team level construct. You just can't be diverse by yourself by definition.
Yeah.
You're not insufficient, except in the sense that you're only a single human being.
Yeah.
But I think that's it, is that there's so many misconceptions, and we can sort of leapfrog over them by touching both on intersectionality and then trying to talk more broadly about what diversity means. So one of the things that we've been doing internally is thinking more about folks with autism, or folks on the autism spectrum. And a very different sort of community of folks have kind of come out of the woodwork and said, I feel seen, or raise their hand.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful, because now they feel like the diversity and inclusion conversation and initiatives are about them and for them too. And it's really about creating that space where everyone feels like they're seen and heard.
Yeah. Right? No, I love it. I mean, it's part of this podcast, part of the Founder's Mind. And one of the things I'm actively working on with my guests, and you and I talked about it a little bit before, is, I want to actively create, and I'm going to use the word that you shared, like a balanced perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whether it's diverse or inclusive or whatever, it's if I just put something out there in the universe, most likely I'll get a response from very similar people. So what I've been doing is reaching out proactively to people that are different than me in many ways.
Yeah.
You know, um, and I'm in agreement. The more differences there are between me and someone I'm talking to, I think the more interesting the conversation is going to get. I think the more perspectives will come out, and for listeners, they're going to be introduced to stories that most likely are new, because no listener can be you and I combined.
Right.
And because we have those differences, that's where that's where a lot of the richness comes from.
Absolutely. And that actually gets to sort of, I guess, like my thing at Atlassian, which is this idea of really thinking about diversity at the team level and measuring it that way. And, anyone listening can keep me honest. You can check it out. It's atlassian.com/diversity. But the reason that I'm really passionate about this concept, and you touched on it, is I've actually changed internally. I talk about building balanced teams.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because I think everyone can sort of just intuitively resonate with that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, we should have a balanced team, right? We don't want only engineers building software because we
Right.
have product managers and designers and support.
Yeah.
But I think the other reason is because everyone resonates with balance, and they're like, I can contribute to the balance. And so we
Mm-hmm.
get away from this idea of us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about what brings more balance to this team. And it
Yeah.
also gets after this sort of tech myth, or this tech practice, I guess, of pattern matching talent. And so by asking the question, like, who brings balance to this team,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually selecting for something that isn't present already.
Yeah.
And maybe that is sort of demographic diversity. Certainly we prioritize, especially for our leadership, making sure that we always say interviewing a balanced set of candidates.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about what balance means in terms of the role. So trying to say, what perspectives or skills does this team lack currently?
Yeah.
How can we try, as we're hiring in this role, to bring in someone who will amplify their teammates and sort of help the team reach its potential by bringing in something unique?
Yeah.
My team doesn't need another me.
No, I think it's a great perspective. And I think my sense is that we agree on a lot of things in this
Yeah.
space. So we can, we can fan each other's perspectives for an hour if we wanted. But on this area specifically, I really appreciate your perspective, because I think it's something that, we need to talk more about, as a society, and I think that certain groups, maybe it's my demographic, need to talk even more about it, because we need to explore it for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I agree with the balance, and also that, every person, including straight white men, and, we all have needs.
Totally.
Right? But there is an element of, who's the controlling party, and what is your responsibility as the dominant, decision maker in making change, and in supporting change, and in sort of raising the bar. And that's kind of what I look at, is how do we invite more people to that conversation? Boards of directors, executives, like this stat about, I think by the end of the year, there's going to be 3 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500, like 500, meaning 500 companies, which and a lot of people know, but that's what that means. 3 out of 500 isn't really a representative sample of society.
No. I mean, and we just got our first Latina CEO, Fortune 500 this year.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah.
Ever. And I have a really interesting relation to that, only because from like I look at sort of, most powerful women in these lists of these women who are killing in business, and I sort of look like them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've got green eyes. But for me, it's still, I feel a gap. And so I can only take my sort of little experience of a little bit of a lack of identifying with those individuals, who are amazingly, successful, which is awesome. But imagine how someone who is even further disconnected from that reality must feel. And I really appreciate the point that you brought up about sort of those of us who are in positions of advantage. And that's something I talk about. I know some people bristle at the concept of privilege. So I'm like, I'm rebranding it.
No, I like it. Positions of advantage. I like that.
Right. Because again, trying to use really plain language with people, because you're like, oh, well, yeah, like men are more likely to get promoted and hired and all of these things. So that's kind of an advantage, right? And people will be like, well, yeah. I'm like, cool. So we already agree with each other, but we've gotten rid of sort of the emotional baggage
Yeah.
with some terminology so that we can really meet each other in a good place. But I think of that for myself too. I mean, even the way that I came into DNI. So I just kind of looked around and I was like, oh, this is not very representative. You know, the industry is going to meetups, people, and all of that. And when I started asking why, I just wasn't satisfied with the answers.
Yeah.
Right? Like tech is a meritocracy. Like objectively, no, it's not. But for me, as someone who, like I said, has these benefits of passing in a lot of ways, I've been very lucky to have a great set of educational and professional opportunities. Part of the reason that I work in DNI is because I have, access that a lot of my community or other marginalized communities wouldn't have. And so my position of advantage, I think, gives me the responsibility of being that advocate for my community, where a lot of my community members, a lot of fellow Latinx people wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do in the same way.
You mentioned earlier that I forget the modifier you used, but you said, essentially that you're a very positive person. I forget what you said.
Oh, I'm like Pollyanna.
Yeah, Pollyanna, right. I'm what I call myself a serial optimist, which I think gets me through sort of the ambiguity of being your own boss and doing your own work and pushing into new adventures. But I'm wondering, so as I'm listening to you, and I'm wondering, any advice for people that aren't familiar with feeling any difference? So obviously, from my perspective, there are things that I'm learning and trying to teach myself. What's a great way to enter into a conversation or exploring differences if you're trying to educate yourself?
So I'm a huge fan of Twitter for this, which is the tip. Everyone thinks this is funny, but the reason I really like Twitter is because it gives you access to people that you don't have access to in real life. So I really tell everyone to go and try to find underrepresented people in the field that you're already interested in. So right, if you're in AI, you can literally go on the Google machine and hit Black women in AI, and people have compiled these lists. And I think that there is a real value in just trying to give yourself access to people's perspectives who you don't naturally have. And the second thing is use Google. There's incredible amounts of educational resources there. The number of essays about these topics on Medium. But the Twitter thing is interesting to me because you're looking for people who are talking about topics you already care about. But you might be surprised at what they're saying about it, right, from their very different lived experience. And it has this sort of twofold value, I think. One, which is you're just learning about a topic you care about. But two, what we know is that bias and sort of that discomfort with dealing with difference tends to go away when we can connect with the human side of people. And so that's one of the reasons I really like Twitter for connection, is because I can, watch someone, how they're communicating what they're saying, and I'm going to learn about their expertise, but they're also just going to become a little more human.
Yeah.
To me. And if you can sort of just get to the point where you naturally are able to get past sort of those signifiers that we tend to see, or you just have different mental maps of those people than maybe the media or your lived experience is giving you, that's incredibly powerful, because those communities will talk about, how not to approach people.
Yeah.
Right?
Like I was, God, I forget who it was on Twitter, but there was an interview, and this guy who's Black and he's in tech basically just answered a question where he's like, I really don't want people asking me about like X, and I know that they're just asking me because I'm Black and I'm in tech. He's like, not interested. And I loved it because I'm sure that I've done that unconsciously.
But it's a learning experience, right? And so that's the other thing, is like you will sort of be able to listen to those voices, and you'll get guidance for yourself, and then also find experts about what you want to learn about, and ask for something specific. So one of the things I get tons and tons of, messages being like, I want to talk, can I pick your brain about D&I? And I want to help so bad, right? Like I have boundary issues about that. Like I want to help everyone all the time.
Yeah.
But for me, it's really hard to respond to that because I don't know what they need. I don't know how complicated it is. I don't know how much time it takes. So, but if you email me and you say, hey, I'm trying to figure out this, do you have a resource about this topic? I can immediately help you, or I can tell you no, but I can introduce you to someone who can help. And so that's the other thing is when you approach people to ask for help, one, ask for something specific, tell them why you need it, and then offer them something in exchange that's more than coffee, right? Not that coffee is not great, but it's things like, can I pay you for your time? What's your standard rate? Or is there something that I have of value to you that I could provide, right? Be open about that. Maybe it's I'm in marketing and I can give you 30 minutes of free marketing consulting if you can give me some advice on this topic. Maybe that's it. But so remembering that when people are educating you about D&I, that they're doing real labor a lot of the times. But yeah, those are sort of a world of suggestions for you.
Is there, how can people sort of follow along in your story? I mean, you are obviously a wealth of knowledge. And if people listen to this and they say, I need more, where can they find you? What should they look for?
I'm going to go back to Twitter again. I'm really active on Twitter. So if you want my opinion on something, just follow me for a couple of days. I'm sure you'll get it. Or you can ask me. But yeah, I think that's part of it. Hopefully.
What's your Twitter handle?
It's at AD Blanche.
I would just agree with your comments on being specific and using Twitter. It's how I'm getting most people that I don't know. It's a great way to connect.
It comes down to, I think everyone sort of gets a lot of requests, broadly speaking. And so I end up triaging based on the people I know that I can help or that I feel confident that I can provide value to them. And so the more specific you are, the easier it is for me to sort of make that connection, if that makes sense. To be sure that I'm actually going to be helpful to you, because there's certainly some people who I just don't have the expertise to be useful.
Yeah. It's also extra work if it's vague, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Takes more time, all that stuff. I really appreciate your time. And I feel lucky, even if there's only one listener out there in the future, that like I get to listen as well.
That's awesome. No, I mean, I was really excited when you reached out because, like I said, I really, really care about just helping entrepreneurs like tackle these issues. And I can't necessarily do that. Like taking care of Atlassian is a big job. And then I sort of have my side hustle and I have life, and that's literally all the time I have.
Yeah.
So opportunities like this, I'm always really excited because my goal at Atlassian, and thankfully I've got co-CEO support there, is that we're trying really, really hard to be very, very open about what we're trying and how it's working and when it's not. Because our goal, and this sounds really silly, but if, there was a founder who learned from what we were doing and then did it even better, right? That's a total win.
Oh, yeah.
Because it means that we've created knowledge that benefited the industry more broadly than just us. So totally. I love opportunities for stuff like this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Founder's Mind. On the next episode, I have Courtney Grange, a multi-potentialite. What's that, you ask? You'll have to listen to the next episode to learn more. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of The Founder's Mind, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at The Founder's Mind. I look forward to sharing future episodes with you all, and don't forget, rating and reviewing The Founder's Mind means a lot, and it's greatly appreciated. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity, and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark, founder's mind is what you see.